The Siege of Leningrad, 872 days of cannibalism and survival. The elderly woman clutched her ration card like a sacred relic. 125 grams of bread per day, sawdust mixed with flour, the difference between existence and oblivion. But her neighbor's teenage son hadn't been seen in 3 days, and the police were once again knocking on apartment doors, searching not for criminals, but for something far more horrifying. Evidence of the unthinkable. Welcome to Leningrad, winter 1941, where human civilization didn't just crack, it shattered completely. The city Hitler decided to erase September 8, 1941. The jaws of the Nazi war machine snapped shut around Leningrad, the Soviet Union's second-largest city, and the birthplace of the Bolshevik Revolution. But Hitler had no intention of capturing this jewel of Russian culture. His directive was explicit and chilling: erase it from existence, starve every man, woman, and child within its borders. What followed became the most lethal siege in human history. 872 days that would claim over 1 million lives, more than the combined deaths of Americans and British in all of World War II. And at its darkest depths, the siege would force ordinary people to cross humanity's final taboo. When the noose tightened, the German Wehrmacht, joined by Finnish forces from the north, cut every supply route into the city. 3 million people, civilians and soldiers alike, found themselves trapped. The only lifeline? Lake Ladoga, which would later earn the haunting nickname the Road of Life. But in those first months, before the lake froze solid enough for trucks, Leningrad began its descent into a special kind of hell. By November 1941, the city's food supplies were nearly exhausted. The daily bread ration for civilians dropped to 125 grams, about 4 thin slices. That bread was barely recognizable: 50% cellulose, 10% cottonseed cake, and a mixture of wood pulp and sawdust. People scraped wallpaper off walls to eat the paste. They boiled leather belts and shoes into jelly. They made meat from carpenter's glue. The Leningrad Zoo became a place of profound tragedy. Starving citizens broke in and slaughtered every animal they could find. Only one creature survived the entire siege: a hippopotamus named Betty, kept alive by a heroic zookeeper who walked miles each day to bring her water and the last scraps of hay. The first winter, when humanity cracked. Then came the cold. The winter of 1941 to 42 was one of the coldest on record, with temperatures plunging to -30 degrees Celsius. With no fuel for heating, families huddled together in single rooms, burning furniture, books, and anything that would catch fire. People froze to death in their beds, on the streets, in bread lines. The living moved among the dead with surreal normalcy. Bodies piled up in courtyards and streets, too many to bury, the ground frozen solid as iron. Dmitry Pavlov, Leningrad's food supply administrator, later wrote, "Death became so common that people ceased to fear it." But something worse than death was emerging from the shadows: the unspeakable crime. In December 1941, Leningrad police created a special division, their sole purpose to investigate what they clinically termed use of human meat for food. The NKVD secret police records, declassified decades later, revealed the scope of horror. By the end of the siege, they had arrested over 2,000 people for cannibalism and corpse eating. The documents distinguished between 2 types: necrophagy, eating the already dead, and actual murder for consumption. Most cases fell into the first category: desperate people cutting flesh from frozen bodies in the street. But there were predators too. One NKVD report describes a woman who killed her 18-month-old nephew, telling investigators she couldn't stand his crying anymore. Another details a gang that lured hungry children off the streets. Street markets were monitored for suspicious meat being sold, often labeled as pork or horse meat. The composer Dmitry Shostakovich, who spent the early months of the siege in Leningrad before being evacuated, would later channel this horror into his 7th symphony, the Leningrad Symphony. Its brutal first movement depicting the mechanical, inhuman march of the Nazi invasion. Parents whispered desperate warnings to their children. Never accept food from strangers. Never walk alone. Some families posted guards while others slept. The city's already shattered social fabric tore further as neighbors eyed one another with suspicion and dread. The road of life and death. By January 1942, Lake Ladoga had frozen thick enough for vehicles. Soviet engineers constructed an ice road across its surface, the legendary Road of Life that would sustain the city. But the name was darkly ironic. German artillery and Luftwaffe bombers targeted the route relentlessly. Trucks laden with supplies broke through weak ice and vanished into the black water. Drivers froze to death behind their wheels. Yet this frozen highway worked. Food began trickling in, then flowing. By spring 1942, the daily ration had increased. During summer, boats crossed the lake. The starvation eased, marginally. People still died by the thousands, but no longer by the tens of thousands weekly. The city that refused to die. What makes the siege of Leningrad so remarkable isn't just the suffering, it's the defiance. The city never surrendered. Even at starvation's peak, factories continued producing weapons and ammunition. The Kirov Works, despite being under constant bombardment, manufactured tanks that rolled directly from the assembly line into battle. Radio remained on the air throughout the siege. When there was no programming, they broadcast the sound of a metronome, a steady tick-tick-tick that told listeners the city still lived, still resisted. The poet Anna Akhmatova, trapped in the siege, wrote verses that became acts of resistance themselves. The Leningrad Symphony had its premiere performance inside the besieged city in August 1942, performed by starving musicians before a skeletal audience. The concert was broadcast via loudspeaker to German troops, a sonic declaration. "We are still here. We are still human. You have not defeated us." Liberation and legacy. The siege finally broke in January 1944, when Soviet forces pushed back the German lines and opened a land corridor. By the time Leningrad was fully liberated, the death toll had reached staggering proportions. Estimates range from 800,000 to 1.5 million people, with recent research suggesting over 1 million deaths. The survivors emerged from the ruins hollowed out, physically and spiritually transformed. They had witnessed the absolute nadir of human existence. They had seen neighbors eat neighbors. They had watched civilization's veneer peel away to reveal the animal desperation beneath. Yet they had also witnessed transcendent courage. Mothers who gave their rations to their children and starved. Workers who collapsed at their posts. Musicians who played with frost-numbed fingers. Teachers who continued holding classes in freezing classrooms, educating children for a future that seemed impossible. The question that haunts us. The siege of Leningrad forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. What separates humans from beasts? Is it simply 3 missed meals, as the saying suggests? Or does civilization run deeper, sustained by those who chose death over betraying their humanity? The answer, perhaps, is that both existed in Leningrad. The city contained multitudes, predators and saints, cannibals and heroes, often living on the same street, sometimes within the same family. The siege revealed not a single human nature, but the full spectrum of what we're capable of, the horrifying depths and the extraordinary heights. Today, the people of St. Petersburg, the city's current name, remember. The Piskarovskoye Cemetery holds 500,000 victims in mass graves. A museum preserves that meager 125-gram bread ration. Survivors, now gone, spent their final years ensuring the world would never forget. Because Leningrad's siege asks us to remember that civilization is fragile, that atrocity wears many faces, and that the human capacity for both darkness and resilience exists in all of us, separated only by circumstance, luck, and choice.